Hi guys, Belle Marie here, and I wanted to discuss a interesting time in my life. Now, this is an incident and something that happened to me when I was a lot younger that I would like to give it the title of my first childhood trauma, and thus it is the most nostalgic for me. So basically, this all started when I was about 5 years old. 5 or 6 years old. I think 6. I don't know for sure. I was young and stupid. That's all that needs said. And basically, I went to a public school, and in my classroom, we had a library. It was filled with, the typical books that age group would read, so a lot of picture books. And one day, I decided to, rather than try to make friends, because
I don't need friends, they disappoint me.
I could not make friends at that age. God had a funny sense of humor and gave me both a lisp and a stutter, so I couldn't speak to anyone. So I buried my free time in books. Still do to this day, actually. I socialize the most with you guys. It's very sad and pathetic, actually. Anyways, back to the story. One day, while I was in that library, I came across a picture book called The Taily Po. And on its cover, I remember it had this little, fluffy raccoon-looking picture. And it was cute. So I decided to read it. Little did I know, that was the day the young little Belle was going to be introduced to the horror genre and would be left with nightmares that kept her far away from raccoons and the woods for months. Because as it turns out, Taily Po is a story that, while read to a lot of kindergartners, should not be allowed near children. Because I was not the only child left with nightmares from this story. And I managed to actually find a copy of it online. And I thought I would do everyone the honor of reading to you guys the first story that kept me up all night. So, this story, as I said, is called The Taily Po. A basic summary of it is a hermit lives in the mountains with his dogs, and eventually he gets killed. A very happy story for children, by the way. Apparently it is an old folk tale that was sometimes called Tailbone or Tailbones, and was very commonly read to, I guess, children around the Appalachian area. Which again means I was not the only child traumatized. In fact, even in the comment section of this online version I found, there are parents complaining that their kid read this, or a teacher read it to their kid, and they haven't had sleep in a long time due to a crying child. Which does make me feel better, actually. It's fun to scare kids. It's not fun when you're the scared kid. But with all that being said, I thought I would read it to you. There was an old man who lived alone in the middle of the forest. He must have been 60 years old, but no one knew his real name. Most folks just called him Old Jake. He had 3 loyal hunting dogs that kept him company on the long, lonely nights. Their names were I Know, You Know, and Calico. He lived in an old cabin he had built himself, way back in the deep, dark woods. It wasn't very big, but it was just big enough for him and his dogs. The cabin had 1 room in it that was his bedroom, his living room, his dining room, and his kitchen too. At the end of the room, there was a nice big open fireplace where he could cook his supper and warm his bones on the cold winter nights. Old Jake loved hunting, fishing, and the great outdoors. He had a little garden where he planted vegetables, and he would go out every day to hunt for rabbits and fish. During the warm months, there was more than enough food to go around, but in the colder months, it was hard to keep his belly full. One cold winter night, the old man's stomach was grumbling, but there was nothing to eat in the cupboards but a few moldy potatoes. He stoked the fire in the fireplace to keep the cabin warm, and he went to bed. He was about to fall asleep when he heard something in the room. He opened his eyes just in time to see a shadow creeping across the wall. When he sat up in bed and peered into the darkness, his eyes grew wide in terror. Sitting across the room from him was the weirdest looking creature he had ever seen. It was short and stubby, with pointed ears and bright yellow eyes that seemed to burn with some strange fire. Its body was covered in black fur and had big sharp claws and a long thick tail. For a moment, Jake just sat there, frozen in fear. He stared at the hideous creature, and it stared back at him. Then, quick as a flash, he grabbed his hunting knife and lunged at the thing. It sprang up and scurried out the hole it had clawed into the cabin wall. The thing was fast, but so was Jake. A split second before it escaped, he brought his knife down squarely on its big tail and cut it off. The creature let out a horrible squeak and disappeared into the night. Old Jake was left standing there with a long, thick tail in one hand and a bloody knife on the other. Jake was about to throw the tail outside when his stomach started rumbling again. He was famished with the hunger, so he took the tail, cleaned it, cooked it, and ate it for his supper. It tasted a bit strange, but there was a lot of it and was very chewy. In fact, it kind of tasted like chicken. With his mouth full, old Jake plugged up the hole in the cabin wall with some old rags and newspapers. Then he got back into bed and drifted off to sleep. He hadn't been asleep very long before he was awakened by a strange noise. It sounded like something trying to scratch its way into the cabin. The old man thought that if he stayed really quiet, the thing might go away. He could hear it scratch, 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 scratch. But then a strange voice outside hissed, "Taily-po, Taily-po. I want my Taily-po." He thought he must be imagining things, but then he heard it again. "Taily-po, Taily-po, I want my Taily-po." Old Jake jumped out of bed, ran to the front door, and threw it open. He called out to his dogs, "I know you know, Calico, get over here." The dogs, they came tearing up to the cabin and ran around, barking, sniffing, and snarling. Couldn't find a thing. Jake shrugged his shoulders and went back to bed again. He was about to drift off to sleep when he heard the noise again. This time, the scratching sounded like it was at the window. Whatever it was, it really wanted to get in, but the scratching seemed to be on two walls at once. Then he heard the strange voice again, and this time it hissed a little louder. "Taily-po, Taily-po, where is my Taily-po?" Old Jake, who wasn't one to frighten easily, was getting a little shaky. This was getting really weird. So he eased the window and called, "I know you know, Calico. Come over here and see what is scratching at my house." The three dogs bounded up to the porch and they sniffed around, barked, barked, and sniffed, but they never found anything at all. Jake decided to stay up for the rest of the night to protect himself, his dogs, and his little cabin. So he pulled a chair up next to the fireplace, grabbed a blanket from his bed, and settled in for the rest of the wind-chilled wintry night. Sleep soon overtook him, and once again he dozed off. It was almost dawn when Jake woke with a start. The sound of scratching seemed to vibrate from every area of the cabin. Jake searched frantically for his axe, his rifle, or something to defend himself with, but he was so frightened he couldn't find anything. The scratching grew louder and louder and louder. "Taily-po, Taily-po, give me back my Taily-po." Jack yelled, "Leave me alone, I ain't got your Taily-po." Then he called his dogs, but this time the dogs didn't come. He waited and waited, but not one dog came running. Jake had never been so scared in his life. He ran to his bed and jumped in. The scratching in the voice grew louder and louder and louder. "Taily-po, Taily-po, give me back my Taily-po." Jake yelled back as loud as he can, "I ain't got no Taily-po, so why don't you leave me alone and go on about your business? I ain't never hurt nobody or nothing, just leave me alone." The scratching seemed to be inside the house now, and the voice was so loud it was deafening. "Taily-po, Taily-po, you took my Taily-po. Now I am back to get it, give it to me now." Jake pulled the cover up over his head and stayed as quiet as he could. The scratching was now in his room. "Taily-po, Taily-po, give me back my Taily-po." Jake then felt the thing scratching up the bottom of the bed and onto the cover. Jake eased the cover down to see what was approaching. Then he saw it. A short, stubby creature with pointed ears, fat feet with long claws, and bloodshot red eyes. It glowed in the dark. eyes that seemed to burn straight through Jake. Before he pulled the cover over his head again, the thing pounced on his chest, looked straight down at him and said, "You've got my calico." Jake yelled, "I ate it. I ate your calico. It's gone." And that thing started to scratch and claw and tear away at poor old Jake, trying to get the calico back. Jake tried to fight back, but the thing was too strong and those claws were too sharp. Jake's screams echoed throughout the dark mountains and stopped, leaving it to silence. Sometimes, if you are out at this cabin at night and you listen carefully, you can still hear a strange voice calling on the wind, "Tally-po, tally-po. Now I've got my tally-po." So, that was a story read to a bunch of 6-year-olds. So this wasn't the same version that I remember finding, but it was very close. I remember the thing that freaked me out the most about the version I had read, besides it being a picture book that also showed Jake getting torn apart, was the dogs got picked off one by one, and the creature only said "Tally-po." It didn't know any other words. Yeah, and I get folk tales tend to be a little darker. Normally they're trying to teach some sort of a lesson, whether that's you have the Irish dealing with all their stories about fairies, or you have creatures like the kappa, all there to kind of teach certain lessons, whether that's, again, the kappa, don't let children be near bodies of water unattended, or fairies, maybe don't trust strangers, or be polite to everyone. But what's the lesson with this one is kind of what I want to ask. I mean, Jake didn't do anything wrong. He was minding his own business and he still got eaten. So I guess at the end of the day, the only lesson that I can take away from this story, reading it now as an adult, is don't go near the woods, and maybe don't read this to children. That would be really nice. But yeah, with that being said, I'll see you guys tomorrow.